This is Insight. Phone lines are open. Dial 384-2191.
Well, it's a Friday in August, second Friday of the month. That means we talk with Marshfield PD, and joining us this morning is Lieutenant Sheridan. Good morning.
Good morning.
Here, bring that a little closer to you. There you go. Put it up there. Okay. And Lieutenant Esser, good morning.
Good morning.
So, this time of the year, and we're on video here. You got your masks on, and that's part of our policy here in the building, but not in the studio. Because it makes it hard to hear. But you see the national correspondents doing that too, and I think to myself, really, outside? And is that they're standing outside filing a report? But everybody's got their opinion on the matter. Maybe they're keeping the cameraman safe. I don't know. But it's a thing that is now directed, but you're not enforcing anything or nuisance calls, or do you consider them, or how are you approaching this?
We will consider those types of calls, and we consider every type of call for that matter. But so far, we've really not gotten a whole lot of those types of calls with people saying, "Hey, I'm in this store, and this person isn't wearing a mask." Thankfully, I think we have a community who are doing their best to be responsible and follow the governor's orders, and we have not seen an influx of those types of calls so far. So,
I don't know if I termed it in my lead up here to the question a nuisance or not, but some people don't think it is, and therein lies the issues that we have. Everybody's kind of, what would I say, edgy today. In your law enforcement business here, how does that play out? I mean, do you find people to be They are when they see you come up anyway. So, but I mean, are you feeling that on the streets?
I think that there is that increase in just overall the way people have felt over the past. I mean, it's getting to be quite a long period of time now where life hasn't been normal for a lot of people, and that does produce, like you said, that little extra amount of edginess. I don't know that that's directly related to a large increase in the number of calls that we've had. It's really hard to gauge that. I mean, there's oftentimes a lot of other factors and circumstances going on that prompt a call for us to respond. So it's hard to measure at this point, but I got to believe that there's certainly that extra set of stress that's been months long now that's contributing to people's lives.
Well, that was one of the things talking about policing in general, is that with the safer at home order, their domestic violence has an opportunity to fester, for lack of a better term, where you're inside and you're confronting each other, and there isn't a whole lot of places to go to get away from that. Have you felt any increase in activity like that around the city?
I don't think locally here much, but I know nationally there are some statistics out there with an increase in things like domestic abuse and child abuse, that type of thing, because of what you're indicating. I think one thing to be thankful for is we've had, obviously summertime come shortly after things started locking down around here, and that's really allowed people somewhat of a release to be able to get outside. And I know that, you go to try to buy a boat or a camper or anything, or a kayak right now, it's pretty difficult to find a lot of those things because people are just doing whatever they can to get outside and get out of those enclosed quarters where we can potentially become pretty nagging at each other in family situations and dynamics, and feel claustrophobic over the last number of months. So I think the weather has certainly helped to relieve some of that.
Well, there's kind of a staycation mentality too here, where you can do stuff that's close to home. But we do see out-of-state plates from time to time because it is summertime, and people will take the opportunity because it may be once in a lifetime. You only have one 50th anniversary, and if it means that it happened to land now, well, I guess I'll take my precautions, wear my mask, but I'm still going to come up from Iowa for the celebration here and see the family. And people will do what they have to do because it's a once-in-a-lifetime thing, but I don't know that I've seen any more or less influx of out-of-community people or felt like that in our area.
I don't know specifically here either. I mean, I've done a fair amount of camping this summer, and when I'm going down I-39, there's plenty of out-of-state plates, as you're going down the road that you see passing you by or next to you. And so I don't sense that there's been a decrease in that kind of travel, but I think when people are traveling, when they get to their destination, they're hopefully taking some of those safety precautions of the social distancing and wearing a mask and trying to do things outdoors, limiting the number of people that they invite to those events to begin with. And I think we're seeing that happen at least, and so hopefully that's helping to curb and slow down the influx in numbers in our local area at least.
It occurred to me as you said that, you see Illinois plates going north, but they don't want Wisconsin people coming down there. So I'm like, are you going to let people back home?
Right.
I mean, we're pretty lax up here on the stringent up until this point when the mask order came around. But other than that, traveling in the outdoors like that, we haven't had many events here in the city, so I would imagine auxiliary and overtime probably a little bit lower this year than what it has been in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of our auxiliary, who provide tons of hours of community service and help out our department with all of those events that you're talking about, the special events. The fair was obviously canceled, Dairy Fest was canceled, graduation wasn't the same as it used to be, and they've historically helped us with all those and more. Hub City Days, the list goes on. And so, they are not being called upon this year to do those things, and maybe it's a nice break for them because they do put in tons of hours for us. So we really appreciate them, and we hope that regardless, that hopefully we can get back to normal and do those things next year. But hopefully our auxiliary not being tasked with as much of that this year is getting a little bit of a nice break as a silver lining.
I guess so. Talking with Lieutenant Esser, Lieutenant Sheridan here on today's Insight program, the second Friday in the month of August. You know that if you're listening live, you may be watching us in video rebroadcast on Channel 989. Your Spectrum Digital tier rotates throughout the month. Or you may be watching us streaming live here on Facebook or at MarshfieldMediaAccess.org. You can see the video of today's program, talking with the Marshfield PD here today about the events that are on everyone's mind. Leads a newscast. After a while, I have to think that when you see the lack of masks and when you see the people that are out there who are advocating to just go on, I think there's a certain amount of, they're picking up some steam because of COVID burnout. I think, as you mentioned earlier in your comments here, how long we've been doing this, when do we get back to no? Well, it's not going to be, and people are not happy with that, how would I say, possibility that it's like the middle school daughter, asks, when are we going to stop? When can we not wear these anymore? And I don't have an answer. I don't know. When everybody gets vaccinated, well, even if there is a vaccine, everybody's not going to get vaccinated. So when do we be able to say we've got herd immunity here, where we have enough people that have gotten sick that we're not going to hopefully have any more that will pass from it? And in your law enforcement, you have had touches or with fentanyl or with things that you wear rubber gloves pretty regularly, even before all this took place. And now I would imagine, is it more heightened when you go out and talk to people? And are you more worried about what they'll think, or are you more worried about how you're going to feel coming home afterward?
Well, I think both, but I think we're obviously very concerned that we want to respect people's well-being. So when we go out on calls for service, we're trying to wear masks and be respectful of not transmitting anything to them if we're unknowingly carrying COVID. And we've also tried to, we don't normally like to handle a lot of complaints over the phone. We like to have that face-to-face contact normally and be a part of our community, obviously, and so much more can be gathered in conversations face-to-face than they can over the phone. But in the last few months here, we've tried to advocate a little bit for handling some of the more minor complaints over the phone, just to lessen the opportunity for any potential unknowing spread that we might be inadvertently giving to others.
Well, that brings up the question, what are you required to respond to? I mean, a lot of times you'll have people call up and ask for something, and like you said, you can handle it over the phone, but there's other times when like say a 911 call comes in and they have a hang-up. Now, you don't know if they're in danger and they had to hang up because of imminent, harm that's coming their way with a domestic abuse situation, or if, the guy with a gun walked in and you don't want to, see him. So you have to respond, and they'll call back and they'll try to follow up on something like that. So when they do you have to, as a general policy, to respond to every call that comes in?
I think generally speaking, we still respond to most calls that are out there, because what we're trying to think of is if there's something obviously that could be an emergency or somebody in danger, we're obviously going to respond to that. But if there's evidence or something that would require us to be there that we wouldn't get from a phone call, then it's still something we're going to go to, whether that's somebody's information they want to pass on to us. But if there's other ways that can happen, like somebody comes to the police department and we meet a little bit more separated, we've taken some actions like that as well. But simple calls where a phone call can just suffice to handle all the information, those are types of, I'm trying to think of an example offhand, but those are types of the things that we might handle just over the phone and not have to respond. I'd say in general sense, though, we are going to still most calls for service.
At least if you know the address, just roll by and see if anything seems out of ordinary, right? I mean, at least, that way. You might have the usual neighbors arguing or whatever, and you don't know what's going on at any given time, or if there's actual danger or not.
Right. A 911 call, like you mentioned, those are ones we're going to go to no matter what, because we don't know, like you said, and so we have to make sure that there's nothing happening.
Yeah, I would think so. Talking with Lieutenant Sheridan and Lieutenant Esser here on Marshfield PD on this second Friday in August on the Inside program, live on AM 1450 WDLB. You may be watching us in video here at Marshfield Media Access as we talk with members of the PD. They avail themselves to us here once a month, and you can call 384-2192, 384-2192 here on today's program and visit as well. The school, it probably won't be like going. It probably won't be the same. Are the crossing guards going to be in force? I mean, I guess you'd have to take a look at it and see what school is going to be in that day, so to speak. Some of it will be in home learning, and some of it will be in person.
Yeah, we're going to take a look at that as it kind of unfolds, and we don't know who's going to be selecting virtual learning and who's going to be attending in person, but we do have our crossing guards all ready and set up as usual to provide safety for the kids walking to school every day. And, we'd encourage people that are dropping kids off or traveling through school zones to get to work every day. As that approaches, keep in mind that we're going to be heavily patrolling those areas. We want people to be moving relatively slowly through those school zones just for the safety of all of our children. It's new. We've had a longer break from practicing that than we normally have because of the early dismissal last spring, obviously. So we all kind of have to work together to get back into the groove of safe school zones and just slowing down and taking that extra second to look and be aware of your surroundings, because some of those kids are pretty small and hard to see with a bunch of vehicles traveling to and fro. So.
As we talked about the crossing guards in place, it occurred to me as you were talking about school buses too. I mean, how are they? What days are we in? Do I have to run every day? But I pick up this family this day, this one that day. I mean, it's a whole different checkerboard there of how that's going to be done, and keeping distance from school buses. And we've had problems where people go around, especially in the city, because you're on your way somewhere, and I'm like, oh Lord, I'm behind a school bus now. I'm going to be late, because there's no way. He's going to stop all the time. But you do occasionally get calls like that, and do the drivers alert you, or do you get calls from citizens, or I mean, how does that normally happen?
I'd say both, but majority is the driver that notifies us of a violation.
And they've gotten some pretty sophisticated video systems within those buses now, so a lot of times they're able to retrieve license plates for us, and they'll actually do a small report of what they observed and generally write in the license plate if they see it without having to access the video prior to, and then they they send us those reports daily or whenever they occur. That same day they send them to us.
So how does that work then? Do you go back retroactively and find that license plate number and issue something, or they have to come in, or do you mail it to them, or how does that work?
Yeah, we do go back retroactively. If we have an opportunity to watch the video from the school bus, we'll do that obviously first to see what that violation consisted of, and try to look at the timing of those when the buses have those yellow flashing lights prior to their complete stop, and then the red flashing lights occur after that, and try to gauge whether or not that driver had adequate opportunity to stop and slow down or not pass that school bus, depending upon whatever the violation is. And then we will almost always have a license plate, so we'll run that registration, find out who the registered owner is, and then try to figure out who the driver was at that point in time and have a conversation with them to try to gauge their perception of how or why that might have occurred, if they even knew that they had done it.
And that's another thing that just occurred to me. It's like NASCAR. Do the points go with the car or the driver? Who's driving the car today? I mean, unless it's there in the video where a face can be seen. And that's another thing, is that prosecution usually would, for instance, if it was some sort of a crime, it would go to the DA, and they would determine whether or not, the city or whatever would find evidence and whether there's enough to go forward with that. But on a citation basis, are you just able to do that within the department without having to go to the higher-ups anywhere, or how does that work out?
Well, the individual officer has discretion based on whatever the circumstances are of the individual case, and if they feel that the citation is warranted, they can issue that. If they feel a warning is warranted, they can issue that. But ultimately, there is also a city attorney in Marshfield that can ultimately decide whether or not to pursue that citation. So he would be, I guess, what you'd call the higher up that would decide ultimately if that gets prosecuted or not.
And usually what constitutes that? Misdemeanor would be something that you would handle on your level. When it got to be higher than that, then it would have to go through DA?
The DA handles the felony and misdemeanor when it's a straight state crime or state statute violation. But a municipal citation, which is adoption of a lot of those same crimes, are just handled as a citation through the city attorney. But ultimately, we decide as officers whether or not we feel we have probable cause to pursue that violation, and then send that to the either district attorney or city attorney, who ultimately decides to continue charging it.
I mean, we're talking about here, if you're just joining us, talking about passing a school bus that has its flashing lights on. And sometimes it has yellow lights, sometimes it has red lights, and red means stop, obviously, but, when the little stop sign comes out, that's the law right there. But slowing down or yellow, sometimes people will think that that's okay because it's not a red. It's just a cautionary thing. And so I don't know, as bus drivers, what they're taught or whether or not it's red or nothing. I don't know if there's a yellow.
Well, they're actually they do a great job of you mentioned before whether or not the bus driver, who's driving that car, and oftentimes that report that we get from the bus drivers will include a description of male or female driver, age, if they can estimate that to the best of their ability. So they're trained pretty well in watching for those violations, and they also understand that they're trying to get those yellow lights on early enough to give drivers a fair warning and every benefit of the doubt that their reds are going to be coming on shortly, and that's going to mean for that motorist to stop. And so that's another thing, like I said before, that we look at the videos for, is to try to determine how much warning did this person have before the reds actually came out. And the bus drivers do a very nice job of getting those yellows on plenty early usually. So if we get a violation, it's generally a fairly obvious violation.
See, but the yellow light, I'm not sure if it means the same thing as a traffic situation, because that means floor it, the red light's going to come for next. So
for some people, yes, that's what that means.
Oh, I've said too much. Talking with Lieutenant Esser, Lieutenant Sheridan here from the Marshfield Police Department on his second Friday in August on AM 1450 WDLB's Insight program here about this time of the year. I don't know what exactly it's going to look like, what school is how many of the students will be there. They only take sometimes half, the A through Z comes Monday, Wednesday, and Friday this week, and then A through M, and then M through Z comes Tuesday and Thursday, and next week they switch, and who knows how many people are going to be there, and what kind of traffic issues. For the most part, there'll be less, I presume, but I don't know what that's going to lead to as far as confusion, if you will. We're just talking here about some things that aren't going to change, like don't pass a school bus, or watch for the crossing guard, or those kind of things. And how, I don't know if I asked this the right way, how low does your radar gun go? I mean, because I see that little sign you guys put up on the pole that, 25, and it starts flashing when you're doing 26, And I talked to the chief before, and he informed me that it's not how high a score you get. I got that bugger up there one time, but, because when you go through a school zone, if you run radar, you're talking about, well, now you're supposed to be at numbers like 15 and 25 in some spots. And does it work that low? Are you able to get those readings accurately?
Yes, we are. And all the school zones are 15 when a crossing guard or children are present during those school times. So, again, we try to heavily enforce those just to educate and be present and be seen. And hopefully we can get voluntary compliance on those low speeds. And for the most part, we do. I mean, we get some stray ones here and there that are traveling way too fast for a school zone. And sometimes they're people that aren't from Marshfield, and they're on their way to something in Marshfield, and they don't even recognize it's a school zone. And but for the most part, we are lucky that we get voluntary compliance with those 15 mile per hour speed limits, because I know it feels kind of like you're crawling, at 15 miles per hour.
Mr. Magoo here going along,
right,
trying to get to where I'm going at that speed. But I'm talking with Lieutenant Sheridan, Lieutenant Esser here, Marshfield PD, on the Insight program today about those kind of things that are going to be a part of our life once again here as school does begin. What's it's going to look like? Well, I guess we'll try to find out as soon as we can here with how many people are going to be there and any confusion that may happen, who's dropping who off, and how to go around. And, when the kids move to a different school, then you're like, I was used to at the elementary, I drive in here, drop them off there, pick them up over here. And now I have a different building and different traffic patterns, and hopefully there won't be as many cars on the road. And I think, you give me your opinion, but when lockdown or Safer at Home came around, there was obviously a dramatic drop in traffic. I see it creeping back up again, and some days it's almost back to where it was at one time. Now you can find a space on Peach Avenue to pull out. There were times when it looked like Lambeau Field let out. As far as I could see, there were cars, It's like, holy smokes, I should have bought a lunch here, because if you're not at a stoplight, you're going to wait until everybody's by. So do you find now that there's, I don't know if I'd say less traffic and less offenses, or and what are the guys looking for? Are you still running speed things from time to time?
Well, I'd say I'd agree with you initially when this happened. There's certainly a noticeable change in Marshfield, less traffic, less people out and about, and I think I agree that it slowly seems to us, without having any real statistics, that it's back close to normal or around normal. We've tried to been diligent in doing some of the same things we've always been doing. We obviously are reasonable in how we enforce those statutes and what people are doing and what people are going through. And there's still traffic enforcement happening. There's still some traffic grants happening. There's still speed out there sometimes, and so we got to continue doing our part to try to, like he said, educate people and hopefully gain compliance.
Well, you mentioned the term grants, and usually that's things like click it or ticket, and what other things are you involved in?
I think it's just all the general speed grant, perhaps. So there's a operating while intoxicated, or OWI traffic grant that are specially focused on looking for those types of violations that we've had.
And generally the response by the department is what, putting an extra person on in certain hours? Is that generally what happens?
Yeah, those specific grants, and a person's just assigned to be a traffic officer for that certain period of time, and it's separate from the regular patrol shift that's working that day.
So there's just more people looking for that particular problem, if you will.
That's their assignment just for that given hours for that period, yeah.
Okay. Talking with Lieutenant Esser, Lieutenant Sheridan here on today's Insight program with AM 1450 WDLB. We'll be talking more. You can join us 384-2192 on the program today, live here on WDLB. AM 1450 WDLB's Insight program here on this second Friday in the month of August. You may be watching us here on video with Marshfield Media Access, or on Spectrum on your digital tier. 989 is the channel. The programs rotate here. Some of the Insight programs with the sheriff, the PD, or the mayor. And I think we're rotating also with County Board Chairman Lance Plimmel is in once a month. So our Fridays, we have a regular rotation here of officials to come through and avail themselves to you for questions and comments. 384-2192, 384-2192. An unusual year for everybody here and for law enforcement as well. I don't know how to ask this other than I'm asking for your opinion in the law enforcement world and the industry. What would you call it today? You're under fire. You're under a microscope, and there has been talk of a sensitivity training. I don't know what else you'd call it here for your department as well. Even though we haven't maybe had protests of the violent magnitude that have happened in some of the urban areas, there have been peaceful protests here, and you were aware of them and didn't feel it necessary to have a huge presence there, but you did interact with people as was necessary. So in the world today, I mean, how do you feel? Do you feel under fire, under siege, under you're being watched, graded generally by the public?
Well, I would say that now we should be under the microscope. We're given power, and with that we should have higher responsibility, and that is something that I would expect, and I think law enforcement officers do expect. I would say in our community, like you said, we've had it relatively easy, so to speak. We've had generally a great support, and I still feel like we have a great support in our community, and I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, I would agree. We have that luxury, I think, of having a community that largely supports us and have for 4 years. To answer your question, I'm concerned about the future of law enforcement, obviously. I mean, in the last at least 5 years, across the board, most agencies have experienced a lesser degree of applicants. And so it's prior to all of everything that's currently going on, it was getting difficult to get people to apply for the law enforcement job. And so I worry about what that's going to look like in the future for us to be able to fulfill our ranks. And I'm not sure what the answer to that is. I don't think that the answer to that is defunding, as some places are doing throughout the nation. If anything, we're going to have to find ways to get people to want to be police officers, and cutting all of that funding for resources and equipment and things like that to keep them safe is probably not going to help those numbers rise, I don't think. So we'll see kind of what happens. But thankfully, we're sort of isolated here from a lot of that.
Well, it's like the Army. They want the best. They want the 3.8 and above grade point averages. It used to be they needed people for infantry. It was more about the physical test, and it was more about the boot camp than it was about. But now it's high tech. The difference of theirs, they're still infantry, but now they can laser guided missiles and drones and things like that, weaponry that requires computer knowledge in order to make it work, whether it's in the field or in the office, so to speak. So your jobs have changed a little bit, but it's still that personal contact with the public, I think, is at the essence of what you do. So you have, without being too condescending, you have the guy who, you're looking for top quality people. And you have the G.I. Joes that come in sometimes and have a little different angle as to why they want to be a law enforcement person with a badge and a gun on their hip, and you get a little bullying from going on sometimes. And I don't know if that comes with you get jaded in the job, or if that was something that happened from the beginning, whether that was kind of a bent you had before you passed the psych test and everything. I get that, but still, at some point, when triggers happen, you revert to what you knew as a boy, and all the training kind of, oops, So at this point in time, you're looking for people who have the temperament to do the kind of job. Correct? I mean, and do you discuss this?
Correct. And in our recruitment then and hiring, we have to be looking for those candidates that have good temperament and solid character and morals in place already and instilled. As an agency, then we need to take that person and train them in the area of law enforcement and all of the things that go along with that to help that person succeed, and then supplement that with ongoing training in some of the areas like you mentioned earlier regarding sensitivity, or a lot of talk is going on about de-escalation type of training. We send a lot of our officers to crisis intervention techniques and trying to, for all of us to learn how to deal with certain types of individuals in the state of mind that they're currently in, whether that's a medical condition or whether it's, a social type condition or whatever, or an emotional disorder, or lots of different things, and we get called to lots of different things. So I mean, our officers need to know, or are expected to know, a plethora of stuff. And so we need to find the right people, but then we also need to continue their education and training throughout their career. And again, as a luxury, our department, for as long as I've been there, has put a fair amount of money into training, that part of our budget, to try to keep up on current trends and make sure that we're sending officers out there that are as educated and up on current training excuse me, as possible, so that way they can succeed out there and give the community what they deserve.
Well, talking with lieutenants here, not chiefs and commissioners, I've seen autistic kids be cuffed. It's tough for you to come into a situation as you're an officer, not a mental health professional. You have to rely on the person who called you to know whether or not it has escalated to this situation. Because when you arrive, this is the way it's going to go now. I mean, for the most part. I mean, you have a de-escalation possibility too. But, when you look at some of those films, I would imagine you see that in training, right? They bring it your way and say, how, what would you do? The old John Quinones show, what would you do? And you are asked to think about that.
Right, and years ago we didn't have that as much. Prior to a lot of squad cameras being outfitted with dash cams, and prior to the body-worn cameras, there wasn't as much of that to learn from necessarily. But now, I mean, we're getting emails every day from different entities in law enforcement that are showing body camera video and things like that we can all learn from and get better from watching if we haven't yet experienced that same exact situation ourselves. And that's the thing too, most of the time the situations are never exactly the same. There's always some little variable thrown in there that could cause that to go in a completely different direction, and that's where we need our officers to be at the top of their game and provide them with the best training and tools possible.
Well, I don't know. I might be being dismissive when I say you've been lucky, but there have been a few videos out there where things could have went a whole lot worse, and your department was actually featured as taking it down to a de-escalation rather than someone getting a round of live fire, which there were weapons pointed. And when somebody reaches, what do? Do you wait until they're pointing at you before you're not even returning fire? People are getting shot in this country on a regular basis, on a daily basis, by officers who are perceiving a threat. And as you go through that training on a daily basis, you know, it's nice. Oh, it's Marshfield. That would never happen here. Your perpetrator is in a mental state that you're not sure of. So, of course, you have to think it would. But beanbag rounds have been used. You've used rubber bullets or whatever to de-escalate a situation rather than using deadly force, so to speak. So, I mean, how much in these protest videos that are coming out are you talked about how you're getting emails and getting links to that? How much of that do you look at and try to familiarize yourself in the case of something were to happen here? I mean, you have a SRT, special response team, with shields and helmets and all the gear. Do you, I don't know if I'd use the word officially train, but do you watch that stuff? Do you look at it and familiarize yourself with the situation?
Yeah, we do. And like I said, we get emails daily on that stuff. And so, not to say that we can't always improve in those areas, but we're trying to do our best to prepare. You know, we can look around the country and see kind of what's going on and see what law enforcement is being faced with, and then do our best to learn from it. Sometimes we don't have that same set of equipment or manpower or what have you, but for us locally here, we do the best we can with what we have, and we're pretty lucky that way too. We're outfitted with pretty good equipment, and like I mentioned before, pretty good training. So we'll do debriefs on video. We'll sit down with a whole patrol shift and do a debrief on a video from somewhere else in the country and say, you know, here's what happened. Are there things that we would have done differently or we should do differently if this same type of thing would happen here?
What kind of training, you're talking about special response team, then what kind of training do you do or are you in the process of at any given time?
Well, our special response team is just a group of volunteer officers within our department, so it's secondary to their main job, which is generally patrol right now. But they train monthly together and going over some of the tactics that may be used in any certain incident. Some of the equipment and tools that they have, they practice with it. There's outside trainings with other agencies like Wood County, Marathon County, Clark County at times, to familiarize ourselves with other agencies because they have other resources we don't have, and sometimes we'd have to come together depending on the situation. There's national and local trainings that are kind of on hold obviously right now, but we've gone to in the past where more teams come together and kind of share those ideas.
What's the main thrust of what you do? I know you've had armed people in a building. That's I would imagine the main thrust of trying to extricate someone from a situation without anybody getting hurt, right?
Right. We've had, in terms of our special response team, you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah. So we've had, thankfully not many, but we have had armed encounters of, a lot of times the special response team is responding to a barricaded subject, somebody that's held up somewhere, that we need to arrest for whatever reason. And sometimes they make themselves armed and the team is called upon, mainly because something like that a lot of times gets past the point of resources available to the on-duty patrol shift, just even in personnel terms. But then also, like Travis said, the special response team has a variety of additional equipment that they can use, and they have more personnel for us to lock down that type of scene and then engage in that and try to seek a peaceful resolution to it. They also get tasked with high-risk search warrants. So when we've obtained a search warrant for a residence, oftentimes it's drug related. If we know that the occupants of that household have weapons available to them, a lot of times we'll kind of go through a threat matrix, so to speak, and we'll figure out how dangerous of a situation could this potentially be that we're going into, and we'll evaluate criminal history of the occupants that we're suspecting to be dealing with, and that who might be present when we make that entry, and then determine whether or not we're going to use the special response team for that, just to increase the safety of everybody involved.
There are times when we talked about defunding, and I thought to myself, that would probably be one of the first things that would have to go. You can't take away the regular duties that you do. You can't cut salaries necessarily. I suppose you could, but that would be a real moral kick in the pants. So that would be the first thing. Does everybody need an armored vehicle? I mean, we talked about why we have one, but now we're talking about less on the budgets here. That would probably be one of the first things to go. You hopefully be able to keep what you've got, but no more of that kind of thing. Maybe a little fewer training, maybe not as much travel, maybe not as much, I don't think you could sell your armored vehicle here down at Associated Lot, and the bad guys might buy that. So, but I mean, that's the kind of thing that I look at when I see defunding, and I look at your department in this size in Marshfield, is like, well, what could you cut? That would probably be one of the first things that would be low-hanging fruit here. Responses to things that, I mean, how often do you get called?
Right, and that's the thing, and that's always the argument, and that makes a good amount of sense. The problem is that when you do get called, or when you do need that resource or those people, you can't really be scrambling for it because you need them now. And we can rely on neighboring agencies for some of that stuff. I mean, we relied on Marathon County, who purchased their armored vehicle a number of years ago, prior to a lot of the agencies receiving those armored vehicles from the government. And so, there's the potential to get help, but sometimes it takes a few hours to get it. And so certainly it's a luxury to our community. We hope that if we can obtain a piece of equipment like that's almost $700,000 brand new, and get it for $2,000 to get it transported here, and we stuck a little bit of money into it, but not a lot. That seems like a wise choice for us to be able to do and have as an immediate piece of equipment if we would need it for a rescue.
Is there a chance, from what I've seen here, and when getting back to the protest again, I'm talking with Lieutenant Esser, Lieutenant Sheridan, Marshfield Police Department, on this second Friday in the month of August. You can join us, 384-2192, live here, or you may be watching us in video on marshfieldmediaaccess.org. Is there, when departments like Minneapolis or an urban area needs extra people, Madison, Milwaukee, is there a call that, do you somehow get an invitation for we need your help? Anybody who volunteer, or anybody who can afford to or interested in doing that kind of thing, come down and help with other departments in protest cases or something like that?
Yeah, we have, and if you remember back when all the protests were taking place in Madison around Act 10 time, our department received an invitation, and some of our officers went to go help with the manpower there. And those requests come in two different ways generally. So we were talking earlier about more emergent situations, and those requests will generally come through a dispatch center, so one dispatch center to another, a neighboring jurisdiction, to try to get extra additional resources like right away. But as far as the events that are pre-planned, we'll get notification through our department by email or whatever, asking for, hey, can you send X number of officers to this rally that's taking place in our city a month from now. So those things do occur. Some of the officers were scheduled to help out at the Democratic National Convention, but that had gotten canceled from what I know. So we're not sending anybody there obviously anymore, but that invitation was sent to our department.
I'd imagine then that the city just sends the bill to the entity that put out the invitation.
Correct. Yes.
For the overtime that you incur in that. Talking with Lieutenant Esser, Lieutenant Sheridan here, wrapping up our conversation on AM 1450 WDLB's Insight this second Friday of the month. WDLB's Insight program here this second Friday in August. You know that if you're listening live on radio or on the web around the world at WDLBAM.com. Or you may be watching us, though, on video at Spectrum Channel 989 on your digital tier, and the government channels are up in that neighborhood. And they have a lot of different communities. Not everyone I know has the resources to use it, evidently, because not all of the channels are used. And maybe some of them may come on from time to time for a loyal basketball game or football game, and then when I tune it in, there's nothing there, so I don't think I ever go back. And I forget that it's not just because I'm not there when something's going on. They're not full-time programming here like they do in the city of Marshfield. So If you would like to know more about that channel and how programming is produced, and you can probably be a part of that, get a hold of Marshfield Media Access, and they will explain to you the rules and regs for how you can be a part of our government channel that is allotted to us here by the FCC. So today, the second Friday, talking with members of Marshfield PD, Lieutenant Sheridan, Lieutenant Esser in here. When we went to break, I said, any coffee with a cop or any of that kind of stuff, other than outreach, probably was done early on in this, after the George Floyd situation here. You had a little bit of a get-together downtown. Other than that, though, because of the pandemic situation here with our masks on, probably not doing much of that anymore, right?
Right, we've unfortunately had to slow up on some of those things. So we were talking about we don't have currently any scheduled coffee with a cop going on. We've no longer been allowing citizen ride-alongs at this point, just because we don't want that contact in an enclosed space like that for any lengthy period of time for the citizen ride-along or the officer. And a lot of the presentations that we would normally do, like involving informational presentations, like drugs and active shooter type of presentations that we often give, all of that stuff has unfortunately been put on hold for now. And hopefully sooner than later we can get back to those interactions with the community and educational things that we like to get out and do.
How are you staffed right now?
We're currently one officer short, I believe, if I'm getting the number right, and we're in the process of looking to hire an additional officer right now.
And we talked about the difficulties here earlier in the program about doing that in this, not just pandemic times, but just in these times here because of the industry itself, and some people are a little shy about getting involved and becoming an officer, as opposed to, I don't know, you guys still do go to elementary school? Well, now this year, a pandemic, I suppose not, but used to go to elementary schools, right?
Right, and
Law Enforcement Day or whatever they had at the school.
Right, and Officer Friendly also would normally, I'm not sure what that's going to look like quite yet for this year, but normally our Officer Friendly would be in the schools as well, and then certainly we have our school resource officers in the middle and high school too.
Is that still going to continue?
Yes, as far as I know.
There had been some talk on national level, again, I don't know how this pertains to us here in Marshfield, but that was a bad thing, and I'm thinking that probably was the only thing that would keep some of these urban kids in touch with the reality of the situation, so to speak, rather than looking at them as them and us. It's just we here.
Right. I think most of us fall into that camp of we believe it's much more positive than negative by having that school resource officer available. And in fact, those who have been school resource officers, I haven't myself, but if you talk to them or if you're working with them later on, I mean, it can be 10 years from when that school resource officer was in the particular school, and a student will come up and still address them by their first name and feel comfortable enough to come up and talk to them from that relationship that they formed back 10 years ago in the schools. So that's very beneficial, I think, for us and for our community.
I don't know if most people would think it's just for quick response. There's somebody right there. We had bomb threats and that kind of business that were going on, and so you got somebody right there in case something should break out. And we haven't had mass shootings talked about for a while, thank God. We got pandemic on our mind now. If it isn't one thing, it's another. The murder locust went away for a while, so I mean, God knows what next. But that kind of thing it's not about necessarily, that is a plus, but it's more about liaison and forming relationships. Am I correct?
Right, I think so, and I think that was the intent of it way back when school resource officers started, because back then we weren't seeing those higher numbers in the mass shooting incidents occurring. Certainly it's been a positive byproduct that the school resource officer is right embedded in that school. If something tragic like a school shooting should happen, they are right there to try to mitigate that as quickly as possible.
Oh, sure. That is, quick response is one thing, but I don't know if that was the overarching reason in the first part for being there.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Talking with Lieutenant Esser, Lieutenant Sheridan, coming in today to visit with us on this edition of the Inside program, this second Friday of the month. We talk with Marshfield PD and the lieutenants today. what do you guys do? You put out schedules? I mean, you just kind of snapping salutes at each other, or what do you rough up the officers on the street and tell them what to do? Throw your weight
we have
around?
two different jobs, but
Throw your weight around down there, acting like an officer?
we just have the privilege of supervising groups of people, and he's in the detective bureau, and I'm on a patrol shift, and so I handle the same types of calls as my officers do, and I'm out there on the road with them.
All right, thanks for stopping by.
Yep.
Thank you.
Appreciate it here on the Insight program.
Your hometown radio station, AM 1450 WDLB Marshfield.